Which Knob Creek bourbon is the best? Tonight, we're going to find out. Let's do this. Hey everybody, and thank you so much for joining me today here on Blind Whiskey Reviews, the most honest reviews on YouTube. Now, I know most of you were expecting the Distillery Wars Shootout to start this week, and I apologize. I tried to do it. I thought I could get it done. Something came up with the family. I didn't end up having as much time as I thought I was going to have to shoot those reviews. And while I would love to shoot another 12 videos tonight, that just isn't going to happen. So you guys don't really know how I've set this up, but for the Distillery Wars Shootout, I need to do the entire thing from beginning to end before I put out the first video, because once I start editing, I have to put in what the different whiskeys are, and I don't want to know. So I'm not able to start putting out the videos I've already shot for you guys until I'm all the way through to the end, because I got to keep it blind from beginning to end. So anyways, I apologize, but I thought I'd bring you another cool video to do, which is our Knob Creek Shootout. I talked about this a little bit before when we did the reviews of all these whiskeys. I will link all of those videos up here. Actually, I might just make a Knob Creek playlist and give it to you up here. I reviewed each one of these whiskeys as I opened the bottle, and I also did side-by-side comparisons of most of them, so we can kind of see which one I like the best. So we've got all those for you. So I have a reasonable idea of what I think should win out in this shootout. So we'll talk about that a little bit up front. For me, I think the 12-year will probably come out on top. I actually don't even know which ones I've got here. Okay, the 12-year will probably come out on top. I'm thinking followed by the 9-year-old, then the non-age stated, and then the quarter oak. Based on my recollections of these whiskeys and how they kind of did in their side-by-side comparisons, I kind of think that's how it's going to fall. Now, that being said, since I've tasted all these whiskeys and done those reviews, they've all had quite a bit more airtime. They've probably all been open for like 2 months-ish at this point, something in that ballpark. So they've had a lot more airtime. I haven't been continuously tasting them. So if they've developed and changed a little bit more, like I was really hoping that this quarter oak might do, I don't know that that's there, and it's definitely going to throw me off from what I thought was going to happen. So it's going to be an interesting comparison, but tonight we will definitively figure out which one of these variants of the Knob Creek bourbons is the best. So let's get started with number one. All right, number one's got a little bit of a light nose, that light apple, light fruit. I'm not smelling much of that Jim Beam nutty character. Number two is a little deeper, a little darker, does have some of that Jim Beam nutty flavor on it. It's got a real sweet pop of like brown sugar on it too. Number three is different too. Got similar notes to both of these, but it's also got a little bit more vanilla to it. Interesting. Number four is very similar to number three. Big vanilla, big brown sugar, but also feels a little bit lighter on the flavors. Doesn't have as much deep, dark character. So that's just our initial impressions on the nose here. Let's get into the taste. Oh, I didn't mention, obviously these are all numbered. My wife poured all these for me. Thank you very much, wifey. And all the answers are in this envelope, which we'll open up at the very end to figure out which whiskey is which. I also got a piece of paper over here to take some notes while I'm doing the tasting, so let's get to it. So just like we usually do, if you haven't joined me for one of these before, I'm going to do an initial pass-through where we do a quick taste. I kind of talk to you guys about what I'm tasting. Then I'll do a more in-depth tasting where I'll speed the video up so you guys don't have to waste your time watching that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at some point down the line in the video. So yeah, just like it kind of smelled on the nose. This one's really doesn't have a lot of depth to it. It's lighter on the flavors. It's a little bitey. So I'm feeling like maybe this is the non-age stated or the quarter oak. Second taste, I'm finding a little bit more depth there, not much. Again, very bitey though, like feels young, feels sharp. And I really kind of remember the quarter oak tasting like that to me. So maybe this is the quarter oak. Get some water here. All right, moving on to number 2. Out of the noses, number 2 definitely has just the most deep, rich nose. Yeah, on the palate, much more complexity, much more depth of flavor. There's more deep, dark notes. There's more woody notes. There's more of that Jim Beam, nutty character. There's some other sweeter notes, but it's not bitey in the least. Where this one's very sharp and kind of harsh on the tongue. This one just kind of glides over the palate, very smooth, kind of oily. Really nice. Another drink of water. We're moving on to number 3. Yeah, number 3 is not quite as deep and dark as number 2, but definitely more so than number 1 here. Definitely more flavor than number 1, more depth than number 1, but we're shy of number 2. It's got a little bit of a bite to it. Not a lot, nowhere near this, but it's got just a little bit twinge of a little bitiness, nowhere near as smooth as number 2 over the palate. Doesn't have that oily character to it. All right. Moving on to number 4. I said number 3 and 4 really smell pretty similar. Number 4 is a bit richer. Now I'm really putting them side by side. Number 4's got a little more deeper, darker depth to it, a little bit more rich, a little bit more complex smelling. See how it does on the palate. Yeah, definitely a little bit more richness on the palate right now. Like I said, a little bit more depth, a little bit more complexity. It has a teeny bite to it, slightly less than number 3. Definitely more than number 2, but everybody's less than number 1. Number 1 is the bitiest and youngest tasting. And like I said, as I recall, when we first opened these bottles, the quarter oak tasted the youngest to me, and I was surprised by that because I really thought the non-age data would be more in that vein, but it was the quarter oak as I recall. So if I'm guessing at this point, I think maybe number 1 is the quarter oak. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go through all these whiskeys, do a little bit more side-by-side comparisons, a little bit more tasting. I'm going to take some notes over here. I'll speed all that up so you guys don't have to waste too much of your life watching that. We'll stop the speed up. I'll kind of go over those notes with you guys when I'm done with that. Maybe do a little bit more tasting to get a final verdict, and then we'll come in for the result. All right, so we are back. Did a bunch of tasting. Somewhere in there my camera died, so the video cut, but not that it really mattered. I was just doing the tasting anyways. So I want to give you some of my notes that I have so far. I'm pretty well decided on most of it. There's a couple close ones though. So on my notes, not a lot different than we got initially, but so for number 1 here, for the mouthfeel, just a bit harsh and bitey. For the flavors, you get a bit of like apple up front. You get a slight nutty character towards the middle of your palate, maybe a little bit of like light brown sugar sweetness, but the flavors are all really thin, really light. Like I said, the mouthfeel is just kind of harsh, bitey, and thin. The finish is really, you're left with just kind of like a bitterness, like you don't taste the oak flavors, but it's almost like this tannic bitterness, which isn't amazing. And the finish, like I'm just sitting here after I tasted it, and it's just tasting. I just got this harsh burn on my tongue. It's kind of a long finish in terms of that burn sticks around with you for a bit. So that's kind of strange for me on this one. Number 2, again, we get a lot of these notes are the same, but the mouthfeel is just smooth, rich, oily. It just feels really nice on the palate. The flavors are all very much more rich and bold than any of the other whiskeys here. So up front, we've got apple, we've got pear, we've even got a little like a red berry character in there. We've definitely got some dark brown sugar when you get towards the mid palate, when you get into the more of those like standard kind of bourbon notes. Definitely got some caramel. Definitely have vanilla and that just quintessential Jim Beam nutty flavors there. On the back end of this guy, you're getting these really nice oaky characters, oak flavors. And on these other ones, we all have like an oaky bitterness to them, but they don't really have these nice rich oak flavors, and this one does. You've definitely got a little bit of bitterness to even it out with some of the sweet characters there, but it's a really nice balanced finish. You got some vanilla, you've got some cinnamon in there, a little bit of spice, which is nice. And the finish is just on the long side of medium, very smooth, very inviting. So this one's a great pour. Number 3, it's a little bit thin on the palate, a little bit bitey, not bad. Not off-putting, just a little bit of a harshness there. The same kind of notes you've been getting on some of these other ones, but just again, a little bit more backed off than we have in number 2. So we've got some apple up front, some brown sugar, some nutty Jim Beam character, some caramel kind of towards the mid palate. And in the back, you've got the vanilla, and you've got those oak tannins. You just don't have a lot of oak flavor. And so the finish is a little bit on the shorter side of medium. So it's not incredibly long, but it lasts a little bit. Over here on number 4, very similar to number 3. We have a slight bite to it, kind of a medium mouthfeel, a little bit longer than number 3, I feel like. You got a lot of the similar flavor characters, though. Those are very much the same. Apple, dark brown sugar, nuttiness, vanilla, a little bit of cinnamon over here. And on the back end, you've got some bitter oak characters and a little bit of like sweet vanilla. And it's a medium finish as well. So these two are pretty definitive for me. These two are pretty close. So I'm going to go back to these just one more time just to decide which one's going to come out on top. And then we'll wrap this whole thing up and we'll figure out which of these whiskeys is which. All right, so I've made my decision. I've decided to rank these as I think is appropriate. So I'm sure you guys kind of have guessed this half of it anyways. So for me, number 1 is my least favorite out of this bunch. Like I said, just tastes younger, sharper, bitier. It's a little harsh. Just not, for me right now, not tasting like a great whiskey. Number 2 is my winner out of this batch. I mean, that was clear from the get. Just a much more deep, rich, delicious, complex pour. So definitely, these two are pretty definitive for me here. These ones were a lot closer, but going back and forth with them a little bit. Number 3 was just had a little bit extra harshness to it and wasn't quite as rich. Number 4 was just a little richer on that flavor, had a little bit more bold character, a little bit more complexity. So it's, for me, number 4 comes in second, number 3 comes in third, number 2 is first, and number 1 is in last place. Now, if I have to guess which one of these is which, based on my initial tasting of these bottles, I'm going to say that number 1 is quarter oak, number 2 is the 12-year, number 3 is the non-age dated, and number 4 is the 9-year-old. Now, not having tasted these before, if I had to guess, I definitely would have moved the quarter oak at least into like the third or second position, just assuming that a special release would have more flavor and more character and more going on for it. But based on what I remember tasting in that quarter oak, it just didn't. So that's why I'm putting it here in last place. So I'm really excited to figure out which ones these are and what whiskeys we put into which place. So let's get to it. So we've got our note here. So as we thought, the number 2 is the 12-year. So the winner by far out of these 4 is the 12-year. Just no doubt. Number 4 is the 9-year. Number 3 is the non-age dated. And number 1 is the quarter oak. So we got them all right. And again, this is based on what I remembered in tasting these whiskeys. And this was several weeks ago that I tasted them. But it was just it stuck out in my mind a lot that this quarter oak just was out of the bunch. And when we did the side by side with the quarter oak and the non-aged stated, I was really blown away. And if you watch that video, and it's linked up in the playlist up here in the Knob Creek playlist, but I was super surprised. I guessed wrong in that video because I made the assumption that the quarter oak should taste better than the non-aged stated whiskey, as it's more expensive. It's a special limited release. You know, you think they wouldn't put out something as a limited release that tastes like this. So, I mean, it showed true here in our side-by-side comparison. The quarter oak, for me, just isn't a great whiskey. It's not worth the money. And to me, I don't even enjoy it. Like, it really isn't a very good whiskey at all. So I've heard differing views, and like, I almost want to taste another bottle just to see if something's wrong with mine. But I've heard other people say they really enjoy it, and it's got these different characters that I am just not picking up here. So, yeah, for me, the quarter oak's a no-go. The 9-year age stated, if you can find it, is another fantastic whiskey. It pales in comparison to the 12-year when you're doing them side by side, but if you were just to go to this 12-year, or excuse me, the 9-year, it is a fantastic whiskey, and side by side with the non-age stated, there's definitely a difference there. That difference to me was greater when we did the side-by-side comparison and the bottles were fresher, more freshly opened, but now that there's been a little bit more airtime on the bottles, it's a little bit closer. These two are pretty close. So I would guess that the 9-year-old and the non-age stated whiskey isn't too young. I imagine they've kept the age pretty close to that 9 years, maybe backed off on the blend a bit in a year or two. Maybe it's like 7-year whiskey, 6-year whiskey, blended with a lot of 8 and 9-year-old whiskey. So, but anyways, the king out of all of these, as I've said many times in this video, is the 12-year. It blows them all out of the water. It is absolutely fantastic. It is rich. It is deep. It is complex. It is smooth and easy drinking, like very, very easy drinking. Like I said, these other ones, to some extent, all had a bit of harshness on the palate, much more here than here. These guys just had a little bit of bite to them. But this 12-year-old is just such a, everybody hates the word, but it's just so smooth. And by smooth, I just mean easily approachable, not bitey, not harsh, very rich coating, oily on the palate. It's fantastic. So I said the same thing every time I reviewed this 12-year-old whiskey. I said it when I opened the bottle, I said it when I did a side-by-side with the bottle, and I'm saying it now. It is fantastic. It is awesome. You will not be disappointed by this pour. We've talked about the price point before, and if you want to see more of that conversation, go back to my other videos with the 12-year, and you can kind of see my thoughts on that. But it is absolutely a fantastic whiskey, and when it comes to Knob Creek, it is the king when it comes to flavor. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you've had the opportunity to try a couple of these or all of these, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Which one's your favorite out of all these whiskeys? I mean, it has to be the 12-year. I can't imagine anybody that's had the 12-year thinks that any of these whiskeys can possibly compare with it. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. As I mentioned, we are going to be starting the the Distillery Wars Whiskey Shootout next week. I apologize that I couldn't get it out for you this week, but I had to be honest with everything. I had to keep it legitimate as I always do. So in order to do that, I gotta put it off to next week. So sorry guys, it's coming, I promise. So as always, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at blind_reviews. You can also follow me on Instagram at Mission Bottle Kill, and you can send me an email at blindwhiskeyreviews, that's whiskey with an E, @gmail.com. And until next time, cheers.